Hello friends and welcome to part 2 of our MERN stack video. In the first video we covered the backend project and we built our API using Node.js, Express and MongoDB, and in this video we are going to use reactjs to build the front-end project and communicate with that API. So if you haven't watched the video, the link is in the description as well as the link to this repo where you can get the project, also the link to the video. So let's have a quick review of what we did in the previous video and then we start with the front end. So we created our server using Express and then we declared the routes for our posts and users API. Then we used the mongoose package to connect to our MongoDB database. Then we created our routes files in which we had specific handlers for different routes. And we protected some of those routes using our auth middleware. Then we created our schemas using mongoose so we can then create a model from that schema. And then we used that model in our controllers to create, read, update, and delete data from our database. Also in our auth middleware, we used JSON Web Tokens to create a signature to authorize users to do certain tasks like deleting, updating, or creating a post. So we built a full CRUD API with authorization. Now we are going to create our React app to communicate with this API. But before we do that, I want to mention that I added just a few lines here. So if you have the project already on your machine and you followed the steps in the previous video, you might want to add these two lines to your posts controllers. So in your backend folder, inside the controllers folder, then the post controllers file. We have two methods, one for getting all the posts, the other one is for getting the user's post. I just added this sort method to this find method on the post model so I can get the newest posts first. So we could of course do this in the React application too, but it's easier to get the posts already sorted from our database. So I added this line to getting all the posts also when we get the user's post down here. And when we successfully grab the user's posts and sort them by date, then we send a JSON response with those posts and also the user's email. But if you are downloading this project from this repo, then you don't have to do any of that because I've already added those few lines in my code. So I just wanted to mention that so we have the same code and now we can start with our front end project. So we can close all of this and inside the root folder, for me it's MERN 2024, I'm going to create another folder and call it front end. And in the terminal, I'm going to cd into that folder and use vite to install React in this folder. So I can say npm create vite at latest. Then when we press enter, it's going to ask us for a project name. Now I don't want another folder inside this front end folder, so I can just provide a dot. That means don't create another folder, just install it inside this folder and press enter. We need to choose the framework. I want React and I want the JavaScript variant. So I want to keep this project as simple as possible. Now I want to add a few more things here. So we have our project. I want to first install React Router DOM because we will use React Router. So let's say npm I React router DOM. And also I want to add Tailwind. So let's go to Tailwind website. We want to go to installation, then framework guides, then vite, and we want to copy these two commands. I just press on this button and back to the project. I can paste that in the terminal. And while that is installing, I'm going to go back to the Tailwind website and copy these texts. Then back to the project, open Tailwind config.js and add those texts to this content array. Let's save this one and close it. And now we need to bring Tailwind directives. So back to their website, I'm going to copy these directives. Now we need to add this to our CSS file. I'm going to create my own CSS file inside the assets folder. So inside the source folder, then assets, create a new file, and I'm going to call it app.css and paste those directives in here. Then I also want to have some icons. So I'm going to use Font Awesome CDN. And we can grab it from this website, which is linked in the description. And I'm going to copy the link tag. Let's go back to the project. Inside the index.html, I just want to paste that in the head tag. Now I want to do a bit of cleanup here. I don't need all this boilerplate. So let's just start with the public folder and delete this icon. Then inside the assets folder, we have this React icon. We don't want it. And we have two CSS files that we don't want. So I just delete those as well. Then in the app component, I don't need any of this. So I can delete everything except the export statement and then create my app component using an arrow function. So this is just going to return an empty tag that says hi. Let's save this one. Inside our main JSX file, we don't have this CSS file anymore, so we want to link the file we created, so app.css. That is our project setup, so if we just run npm run dev and open this link in a browser, we should have our project. There we go. So we get a warning because we don't have any utility Tailwind classes. So let's add some to our body tag. So I just want to add some background and a global text color. So that's it. Now let's close everything and start in the app component and bring in React Router. That is our first step. All right, so first I'm going to import a few things. We need the browser router, then routes, and also route. And we are going to import them from React Router DOM. Then instead of this empty tag, first we want to create a browser router. Inside that, we want to have our routes component. And inside the route component, we will have a route. So this will be our layout route, and the path for this one is going to be /. So we will have dynamic routes, and this is the beginning of every route, right? And the element that is going to render, we want to call it layout. And by the way, if you are not familiar with React.js, I have a crash course which is linked in the description, and I strongly recommend watching that first because we need to have at least a bit of understanding about React before we get into this. So now let's create this layout file. Inside our source folder, I'm going to create a new folder and call it pages or views. Inside the pages folder, I'm going to have the layout.jsx. In this document, I can just create a function, call it layout, set it to an arrow function, and let's export it first. Now we want to return some markup in here. Let's have an empty tag first, and then I will have a header. Inside the header, I want a navbar, and for now, let's just say hi and save this one and format it, then go back to the app and import this one. So if we retype the name, VS Code should give us the prompt to import it. So now we have our text on the screen that is coming from this layout. So let's design our navbar first. For our navbar, we don't want normal anchor tags. We need link tags so we can take advantage of React Router DOM. Instead of using an A tag, we are going to say link. And again, VS Code should import that for us automatically from React Router DOM. So this link component takes a to component, and it's going to accept the URL. In this case, we just want to go to the homepage. And I want to have a homepage here. So like that, but instead of text, I want to have icons. So let's go to Font Awesome site and just search for home. And of course, you can choose any icon you want. I want this one. So you can just click on it, and let's just copy this tag, go back to the project and paste it here. Now, I don't want another tag inside this. So I can just add the classes to the link itself like that and get rid of this I element, and we get the same thing. So that is our homepage. Then underneath that, I'm going to have two other links for login and register. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it here 2 times. The first one is going to be /login, and the next one register. So for the icons, if we go back to Font Awesome and just type login, I believe. Yeah, so we have this right to bracket. So I can just copy the name and replace with this name. So after FA dash and then right to bracket. For register, I want to use this icon. So user plus. Okay, so we have those icons up here. Let's style our header using Tailwind. So I'm going to add some background. Text should be white. And on the nav itself, I'm going to add flex, items center, and justify between, and some padding. So padding 4. And by the way, I'm zoomed in here. So if I just go back here, maybe 200%, that's fine. Now on this div, which is the wrapper for these 2 icons, I'm going to add again flex, items center, and some gap, maybe gap 2. We don't have any styles for our links, and I'm going to have a custom class. So first, let's add the class to all of these links. So I'm just going to use the multi-cursor and just add nav link. So we don't have this class yet, But if we go to app CSS, which is our Tailwind directives, we can create our own custom classes. So first we need to select the layer we want to work on. So for example, this is going to be a component class, and then we want to name the class. So I called it navlink. Then we want to apply some Tailwind classes. If you want to use plain CSS, you can just use the plain CSS here, for example, font size 24 pixel, and if you save it, you can see it's changing. But if you want to use Tailwind classes inside this custom class, you can use the apply directive and then use Tailwind. So I want to add some width, maybe 10, and height 10, and rounded corners. Then on hover, we will have some darker background. So indigo 600 and grid and place items center. Now, I think 10 is too much, so I'm just going to change these to 8 and refresh. So that is our nav links. Now I want to focus on login and register first, and then we get to posts. So in other words, I want to work with users API first and get that done, then switch to post API. So we don't have to go back and forth. So first I'm going to create 2 pages for these. Inside the pages folder, I will have another folder and call it users. And inside that folder, I will have a login JSX file and also a register JSX. So let's create our functions here. So first one is register here, and I can just use an arrow function and return some text, then export it. Then I'm going to copy the whole thing, go back to login, paste it here, and just change these names like so, and go back to the app where our routes are sitting, and then add those routes inside this route layout. So this is going to be the parent of every other layout. So in here, I can have another route that is going to be self-closing tag, and the path for this one would be login. So we don't need the forward slash here because we already have it up here. Then the element that is going to render, it's going to be login. So again, VS Code should auto import that for us up there. Then I'm going to just duplicate this one, change the path to register, and change the component also to register. So now these nav links should work. So if we go to login, we get login up here. And if we go to register, we go to register. We don't have anything on the screen because in our layout, we are not saying where should this other routes go. So we have our header. Under the header, I want to have the main tag. We want everything go inside this main tag, right? So we can use the outlet component, which is again part of React Router DOM. If I save this one now, we should see our texts. So those are being injected in this main tag. So we have our login and then register and then home. So on the home page, we don't have anything, I believe. We don't even have a home page, sorry. For now, it doesn't matter because our home page is going to be where we get all the posts. So we don't really care about it at this time. So on the main tag, I just want to add some padding here. That's it. Okay, so let's start by creating a form in the login page. So I'm going to get rid of this empty tag, create a section. Then inside this section, first I will have an h1 that says log into your account. Under that h1, we will have our form. So let me format this and save it. That's what we have. So we don't need the action on the form. And then we need 2 input fields. So the first one is going to be type email because we are expecting an email and password, right? And let's have a placeholder for it that says email address. Then I want a class name. So I will create my own class name, call it input. Then I want this field to be auto focus. So when we load the page, this input field should be selected already. So let's save this one. For now, we are going to leave it as it is. I'm just going to copy it, paste it, change the type to password, change the placeholder to password, and it doesn't need autofocus. So those are the only input fields I want. Then I want a BTN or a button that is going to have a class of BTN, and the text should say login. Okay, so on the section, I want to have a class of card, and on the H1, I want to have a class of title. So let's start with the card. So go back to the CSS and create our card CSS class. Let's say background should be white, padding for rounded corners, and some shadow. Next, I want to target the title. So let's apply some font, bold, and just add some margin bottom 6. Then I want to grab the input fields. I use the class name input. I want to apply these classes. So it should be block, display block, width should be full, some rounded corners, some padding, and the placeholder text should be small. And if I save it, that's what we get. So let's add some border, but in Tailwind, we can use ring. So I want to set the border to none or 0. Outline should be 0 too. Then I want to add ring 1 and ring color. So we can say ring indigo 500, and that's what we get. Then when it is focused, we want ring to be 2. All right, so just add some margin bottom 4, and I think that's good. So that is for our input fields. For the btn or the button, I want to apply kind of the same classes. So block and width full and bg or background indigo, text white, and same rounded corners and padding, of course. And if we refresh the page, I'm on password right now. If I refresh, we go back to the email. That's because of the autofocus. This is why I love Tailwind. You can see how easily and how fast we can just create something really slick and nice. And we can come back here and change it. For example, I want to change the text for the title bigger. So there we go. Or the margin bottom should be more. For example, for the card, I want padding X, maybe more, 6, and padding Y, I want to be 10. You can play around with these numbers, of course. I don't want to get too concerned with the CSS. I just forgot one thing. For the button, when it's active, I want to set the background to indigo 600. So we have some sort of an indicator that we are clicking on it. So that's our login, which is just plain HTML. I want to have a section down here to show if there is any error. So let's create error state first. So I want to call it error state. And we are going to use the use state hook. So let's call it error and set error, and then set it to use state, and initially it's going to be null. Under the form, I'm going to add the curly brackets to check if the error is true. Then I want to render a custom component and call it alert. So this alert component should take a prop. I'm just going to call it message, and for the message we will show that error. So whatever error is. Now we don't have this component, we will create it in a moment. So let's create this component here. So inside the source folder, I'm going to create another folder and call it components. Then inside the components folder, we will have our alert.jsx file, and let's just create the function. And we said we are going to accept a message, and we called it MSG. So this is our prop. So you know, in React, the props are passed down to the component as an object. So we can destructure it and just grab that prop that we want. So let's export it first. Export default alert, and let's just return a div that shows that message. Okay, so that we get up here. Now we have this kind of an error or warning here. That is because of the prop validation that is coming from ESLint. So we can just disable it by going to this quick fix and then disable prop type for this entire file. So basically adding this comment on top. All right, so let's go back to login and import this alert component like that. And we don't have any error. Let's just change this initial value to OK. So we have something on the screen. So let's go back to the component and style this a bit. So it's going to be super easy. So bg red 500, text white, and padding 2, rounded MD, and margin top 6. Maybe the text is too big, so we say text is small, and that is our error. Now I want to have an icon here before the text, so I'm going to go to Font Awesome and just choose maybe danger. I think this is good, so I'm just going to copy this whole thing, that I element, and paste it before the MSG. So we need to change this class to class name, and that's good. That's all I want. So that is our alert component. So whenever in our application we need to show an error message, we can just use this one. So let's close this one and put this back to null. So the next step is to grab the data out of the form, and of course we are going to use the use state for our input fields. I'm going to add comments here, so form data state. Now, of course, we could use an object here for the use state and have all of these state in one place, but I think that makes things more complicated because you know that the state is read only. And whenever we want to set the state, we need to return the object and then just change that one particular, property. It's going to get super duper confusing. So I rather use just simple individual variables. So let's do this. const email and then set email and set it to use state. And also I should say, actually, we don't have to use the state because we don't really need the reactivity for these input fields. We could use a ref hook, but since we are using the state anyway, I think it's just makes sense to use the same hook. Now, when we get to registration, I will use the object method to show you how you can do it if you want to. So of course, the purpose is learning here, and we want to explore different ways. Anyway, so let's stick with what we have now. We have our email and password, and we want to use this for our input fields. So on our email input field, we want to add the value that is going to be email. Then for the onChange method, we are going to pass an anonymous function and grab the event and set the email to event target value. So if I save this one and we type in here, whatever we type in here is stored inside the email state. So we just want to copy these two lines and add it for this password field and paste it here. So if I format the code, it looks much better. The value for this one is going to be password, and the function that is going to change it is going to be set password. Now we want to click on this button and get the data. So on the form element, I'm going to add an unsubmit event listener and use a handle login function to handle the form submit. So up here, I'm going to make a comment and say handle login and create that function. So we need to grab the event again because we need to prevent the default. So we want to say e.prevent default, and let's just log email and password. All right, so let's see if this works. So I'm going to give it a refresh and inspect this. So open the console. So let's say email john@email.com and password yada yada yada, login. So we get it in the console, it works. But for the actual functionality to logging in the user using our API, I will add a separate file so we can have all our functions in that file. So we will see that in a moment. For now, we just want to keep it as it is. All right, so before we get into any logic, I'm just going to copy this whole thing and add it to our register route. So because it's going to be very similar. So let's go to register page, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy everything inside the login function. So from this comment line and all the way to this closing parentheses. So let's copy it, go to register and replace this return statement with everything from login. So let's change things around. First, we need to import the use state hook. So let's just retype it and we get the import automatically. Then we need to change this handle login to handle register. Then we need to change the title to something we want. So create a new account, for example. The input fields are the same, but I want another one for password confirm. So I'm just going to copy paste this password input field, change the placeholder to confirm password. And for the value, I'm just going to leave it empty or leave it as it is for now. Let's change the button to register and import this alert component. So again, retype the name and VS Code should auto import it for us at the top. Now, like I said, I want to use an object instead of individual properties here for our register form, just to show you how it works, and you can decide which one works for you best. So I'm going to get rid of this second use state hook and change this one to form data, or you can just call it form. And this one is going to be set form data. Then instead of passing an empty string as a primitive data, I'm going to pass an object. So this would include all the input fields for our form. So we need an email, which is going to be an empty string. We need a password, again an empty string, then a password confirm. And then I'm going to comment this line out so it will not give me an error. And on the input fields down here, we want to use that form data. So for the value of email, we want to say form data dot email, of course. So this part is fine, right? This is easy. The part that might be confusing comes in this function. So we need to set the form data to a new object, because in React, the state is read-only. We cannot mutate the state. We need to return a new state. So what we need to do here, return the state as it is. So let's say form data. This is our state, right? So we want to return whatever that is using the spread operator. Then just change the email. So we want to set the email to event target value. So this part is the same. So that's how we can use the state if we have an object like this. So again, you can decide if this works for you best or this one. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy these 2 lines and paste it for the password, change this to password. So both of these values, so in here and down here. We don't need to change this one. This is going to represent whatever the state is. So we just want to change the password, not the rest. And let's just paste it down here too. We need to change these 2 email properties to password confirm. So let's save it. That's what we have. Let's test it out. So when we call this function on the form submit, we want to console.log that form data as it is. Let's save it. So let's add some email, for example, john@email.org, password 321, and then for the confirm 123. So it doesn't have to match at this point. We just want to test register, and we get an object where the email and the password and the confirmed password values are set. So this is completely up to you. If you want to use 3 lines of use state or just use one use a state hook, and it doesn't really matter which one you use. It is completely your preference. All right, so we have our login and register pages set up. Now we want to focus on the functionality. So we want to actually register and log in the user, and we are going to use a context hook so we can have a global state, because we need to know in many pages if the user is logged in or not. So that is going to be our next job. Okay, so first I'm going to close these files that we don't need and just leave the login and register open. Now, like I said, I want to keep this project simple. And one of the most confusing parts of React for me personally is the reducer hook. So I am not going to use that one. And instead, I'm going to use my own controller. So inside the source folder, I'm going to create another folder, call it controllers. Now inside this folder, I will have 2 JS files. So simple JavaScript. So we want to have users controller.js, and then later on we will have posts. First, I'm going to make my signature comment here. So log in the user with all those stars. Then we want to create functions for login and registering the users that are not part of React, because since we are using this approach and it's not a custom hook or it's not a component, we cannot use React components. We cannot use React hooks. We need to just use plain JavaScript. We just want to make API calls, right? So I'm going to create a login function here. I'm going to call it login user and set it to an async function because we want to use the fetch API, and that returns a promise. And we are going to accept an email and a password. So we know our API, the API we built, is expecting an email and password in the body of the request so that our API can process that and see if the user is authorized. But first, I want to check if the email and password actually have some value. But if they don't, we want to throw an error. So let's say if password and email are empty, we want to throw an error, and let's just say all fields are required. And if you remember, we actually have these tests on our backend too, but it's better to check what we can in the front end before calling the database. So if that's okay, then we can create a response object and set it to await, then use the fetch API, and then pass our localhost API URL. Now, because we are working in a local development, we can't just say localhost and pass the URL. We need to actually set up our project to accept that localhost as a valid host. We will do that in a moment, but for our fetch address, we want to go to /API/users, then login. Remember, this is the path we chose in our backend. So if for a moment I open my backend folder and then go to server, we have our /API users, and then inside the user's route, we have login for the login route. So we want to fetch that one, but we need to set the options because it's not just a GET request. We want to set the method to post. Then we need to set the headers. For the headers, we want to set the content type to application JSON. Then we need to send this information in the body of our request. So we want to use JSON stringify, use that email and password as an object like that. So that is our request call, if you will. Now we want to create data object that is going to be the JSON response. So we want to say response.json, and this JSON of course returns a promise again, so that's why we need to wait for it. And then we want to check if the response was not okay, then throw another error. This time we want to just grab the data error. And we do this because again in our API we had an error object if there was an error, right? So we want to grab that error message from our API. For example, email already exists and so on. So just to show you, this error is coming from our handler. So user, for example, when we go to login, so these responses. So we have this error key, right? And that's what we are grabbing here. So this data is our data and that error is the key. If everything is successful, I'm just going to log into the console the data, which is this one, right? So we will come back to this. I just want to test this out and see everything works properly. All right, so of course we need to export this so we can use it elsewhere. Let's just say export login user like an object because we will have a register one later. So save this one, go back to login page and get rid of this console.log and use a try catch block because we want to get the errors too. Inside the try block, we want to log in the user and VS Code will auto import that for us. This expects an email and a password. So we have it up here so we can just pass email and password. Remember, we set this to be an async. That means it is going to return a promise. You can see up here. So we need to add await here and make this handle login function async. So that is going to log in the user if things are done properly. Otherwise, we want to set the error, so this state up here, to this error object message. So this error object message is going to be these messages that we provide. Let's save this one and open the console and make sure we go to the login page. I was on the register page. And let's press login without anything first. Press login, we get all fields required because this check kicks in first. Okay, let's add an email that doesn't exist and some nonsense password. Press login. We get this error, which is not what we expect because for one, our API server is not running, and the second one is that it's not set up properly. So in the terminal, I'm going to press on this icon right here. So I will have two terminals side by side. Now, in here, I'm in the front end. I want to go back one directory and then cd into backend. Then I want to run the server. So we can say npm run server. This is the script we set up in the previous video. So if I run this one, we would have our connected to database and listening to port 4000. But we need to configure read to understand this is the local host we want to work with. So let's go to read config. Right under this plugins, we need to add the server, then set it to an object, then add the proxy, set it to another object, then give it a name. By convention, it's /API. Then this is going to be another object that would have the target. Now this target is this local host. So for me, it's http://localhost port 4000. We also want to set the change origin to true. So save this one and you can see read will restart the server because we changed the configuration. So let's go back to login page and add some email that doesn't exist and some password. Press login. Now we get incorrect email. So now we know our API call is working properly because this is an error message that is coming from the API we built. So if we open our database, and I've already done that, I have one user. If you don't have any user, you can use the postman. In the previous video we set up postman, you can use this one to create new users. But I have this mic user, right? So I'm just going to copy the email and paste it here. So now this is correct. So the email is correct, but the password isn't. Press login, we get incorrect password. So you can see our error messages from the backend is actually working the way we want. So the password for this one, I set it to be 321. Now, if this is correct, we should get an object in the console. Press login. We get email, mic, and token is coming from JSON Web Token. This is exactly what we want. So instead of login the user, we want to save this information in the local storage so we can use it elsewhere. So I want to say local storage set item, then choose a name. So token. It's going to be data.token because it's an object with an email and a token, right? Now I'm going to duplicate this line and change this to email as well as this one. And instead of console.log, I'm just going to return the data. Let's save this one. Press login again. Now we don't see any feedback. We don't have any feedback at the moment. But if we go to application tab here and in the local storage, and if I can make this a bit bigger so you can see local storage, and then this URL right here, we have token set to the user's token and then email. So this is what we are going to use later on to make sure user is authenticated. Okay, so right now our login page is working almost completely correct. We just have to add a few more things which we don't have at the moment, but I will come back to this later on. So next I want to set up our register functionality. It's going to be kind of the same. And then when we are done with the register, then we will set up our global state for the user so we can update our global state when the user logs in or register. By the way, to me, this setup right here, it's kind of cluttered and this is not the normal way. I just want to have a bigger font or bigger screen here or bigger components so you can see easily. Otherwise, this is kind of driving me crazy. Anyway, maybe I can make this a bit smaller. I hope it doesn't affect you guys. So, and I'm zoomed in here even in VS Code. So you can see down here, it's set to 2. Maybe put it to 1. Is it too small? Well, I'm going to set this to 1, but change my font size. So let me go to setting, change the font size to 22. I think that's okay. The font size is bigger, but these components are smaller. Anyway, we are kind of going sideways here. So let's copy this line of comment and I'm going to paste it underneath and just change this to register. We want to create a register user, set it again to an async function. And this time we need to accept email, password, and password confirm. All right, so first we want to check again, like up here, that these fields are not empty. So we want to say if email or password confirm are empty, then throw an error. Then we will have another check that would check if the password matches or actually doesn't match the password confirm. So if that doesn't work, we want to throw another error and say passwords do not match. If there is no error, we want to create our response object, set it to await and use the fetch API again. This time we want to call our API users. That's the endpoint we specified for registering a user. Now again, we need the options. So I'm just going to copy it from up here. So we need the method, headers, and the body. So copy these, paste it down here. It is exactly the same as we have up here. So we just need an email and password. Then I'm going to create our data that is going to be the response JSON. Then I'm going to copy the rest. Actually, we could have copied the whole thing. So, but I'm going to copy this whole thing here from this if statement and paste it right underneath this data object. So we check if the response is not okay, we again throw an error where the error message is coming from our API or backend. And if it is successful, we will again save the user information inside the local storage. And that is our register function. So quite easy, right? Let's just export this and go back to register component. And where we have our handle register function, we want to use a try catch block and use that register user function. So I'm using await here because remember that is returning a promise. So we need to change this to async and we expect email, password, and password confirm. So we can use the form data email and password confirm like that. Then if there is an error, we want to set our error state up here to error.message. Okay, and I think that should do it. So that is our register. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete these two keys from local storage. So I'm just going to manually delete them and go to the register page and refresh. So first, I'm just going to click register. We get all fields required. Let's add some user that is already exists. So mike@email.com. Then the password 321 confirm 321. Register. We get email already taken. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, let's change it to John, but change the password to 322 and this one is 321. Register, we get passwords do not match. So let's actually do it right. 321 register. We get token and email. That means the user was created. So if we check our database, we have the user already created. So our register form is working the way we want. Now the next thing is to set up our user global state using a React context. Before we do that, I just want to add something that is not necessary, but it's a nice touch, I would say. So, you know, like these icons don't have any name, and it's kind of, you might be wondering, okay, which one is registered? We can just go to our layout file, and on these links, so for example, on this login link, I can add a title attribute and just say login. Same thing for register. And this is going to be the tooltip. You know, in many websites, when you hover over a button, after a few seconds, you get that kind of a pop-up that says what this icon is. So I think it's a nice touch only by providing this title. So I'm going to do this for the homepage too. All right, let's start by creating a user context. Okay, so let's close these files. We want to create a folder inside the source folder and call it contacts. Inside that folder, I will create a file and call it user contacts with a capital U. And it's going to be a JSX because we will return components. So React contacts is a way to share a global state with all the components that inherit from this component. Instead of passing down the state as a prop, we will use a context. And I have a short video on different React hooks, including use context. So I also recommend watching that one. Anyway, so first we need to create our contexts. And we can just say const user contexts, set it to create context from React. Now, this is a function we need to invoke it. So this user context is basically a component, and we want to use this somewhere else. So we can just export it, and later on, we will use it using the use context hook, and this is the context we will grab. Now we want to create our component. So let's say user. So this is our custom context component. We want to call it user provider because it's going to provide a global user state, and we want to set it to an arrow function, and in here we can create a user state. So for our users, we want to have two properties. One is going to be email and one is going to be their posts. So again, we can use the use state hook here, and I want to set this to an object. So I want to have an email for my users that is going to be from the local storage. So we can set the initial value to local storage get item, and the key here is email. Because when we log in and register the user, we create those keys, right? And we want to grab it using these contexts. Now, if it doesn't exist, so if the user is not logged in, then it's going to be null, and that's fine. That's exactly what we want. We also need the posts, and the posts for the users is going to be an array of objects, but at first, so as an initial value, it's going to be an empty array. So that is our user state. Now we want to share this with the rest of the components. So we can return the user contexts component. We can say user contexts dot provider, and I will explain this in a moment. So this user context is this context that we are creating up here. And this provider is going to provide whatever value we tell it to provide. And we can say the value that we want to provide is going to be an object that is user and set user. Basically, what we are doing here, we are saying, I just want to share this array with two elements with the rest of the components. That's it. So it doesn't matter what they are at this point. It could be anything. I just want to share them so we can call them from any component. So if I want to update the user state, I can just use the set user function and update it, and this will be updated from any component. Now, of course, in here, we want to have login page or the dashboard for the user and other components. So we can expect a children component and also accept that as a parameter in our function. This is kind of the same as using outlet for our layouts, but that is for React Router, and this is just for React itself. Anyway, now we need to export this. So I'm just going to export default user provider. And you'll see in a moment how this works. And since this is again giving me that prop validation, so I can just do the same thing, disable it, and we get this. We can disable this entirely by going to this ESLint and add the rule somewhere down here, but I don't remember exactly how to do it. That's fine for now. Okay, so let's see how we can access this user from other components. For example, our login component, if I go there or register or anything. So we need to add this user provider as a parent component for the children. And we can do that in our main because that is our app. So that is our root component that contains everything. We can just wrap this app with our user provider. So let's just import it. So I want to say user provider. That is our custom provider component that we just built, right? This one. And we can test this out by going to, let's say, login. And first we can use that user context. So we need to grab the context first. So, and that's why we export it up here. So let's create a const, and we want to destructure this value. So I just want to grab the user and set it to use contexts this is a hook from React, and it would take the context we want to use. In this case, we want to use the user context. And you can see all of these are being imported up here. So for some reason, VS Code is not merging these together. So I can just kind of organize this. So I don't need this import. So these are from React and these are custom made. And now we can just log that user. So if I save this one, we are on the login page, save it and go to console. We get email, whatever the email is in the local storage. Let's go back to application and make this bigger and open the console here. So we have the console and the local storage. All right, so we get email set to this john@email.com, and posts is an empty array. So that's what we specified here. If I add anything here, let's say okay, you can see we get an array with one element that says okay. Again, we are using this context because this is not the only place I'm going to call this user. In fact, it's going to be called from many places because we want to make sure the user is authorized to go to certain pages and perform certain tasks. Anyway, this is our user context. And that's it. That's all we have to do for our user context. Okay, so I'm just going to close it. And in the login page where we grab the user, I want to grab the set user. We don't actually need the user. We just want to set the user to whatever we get from here. So for now, I'm going to delete that console.log. Okay, and when we log in the user, we want to update the user state. So let me make a comment here and say log in the user and then update the user state using this set user. I can call the set user and it's a function that is going to update the user context. We know this is a state with an object and there are only two properties. So we don't need to use the spread operator. So I can just pass an object here and say email is going to be this email. So I can just pass email. I don't need to say email is going to be email. They have the same name. And then post is going to be again an empty array. At this point, we are not getting users posts. If I save this one, we are setting our user state to be this email. But let's do something just for the sake of learning things. Let's go to register and import the user state here as well. All right, so I'm just going to make comments again, use user context. And again, we want to say const user and set user and set it to use contexts. And I want to say use the user contexts and console.log that user. Right now, we are on the login page. I'm going to delete these two keys in the local storage and log in with the user. So john@email.com and the password was 321. So if I log in, we get email and token. Now let's go to register by clicking on this icon. We get email and then post is still the same. So in this way, we can see this user is in fact a global state because we changed it somewhere else and the state was in another file, but we are able to read it from a completely different component and it works the way we want. So anyway, we just want to do the same thing here. So back to login page, we don't actually need this user, we just need the set user. So I'm going to get rid of that one, copy these lines and paste it in register. We just want to do the same thing. So in register, we don't have the email as an individual variable, we have it inside the form data object. So we just have to say email is gonna be form data email. I also want to add a comment here and say register, and we don't need the user object up here. We have one more tiny step with our login and register, and then we will be completely done. You notice when we log in or register, there is no feedback. Nothing happens and it stays on that page. It is not what we want. We want to navigate to the user dashboard if the login is successful. Let's create a component for it. So in the users folder, I'm going to create another file and call it dashboard.jsx and then create the function here that would return just some text. All right, so let's just export default dashboard. Let's go to our app and add the route for dashboard. So I'm going to duplicate that line, change the path to dashboard, and the component of course is going to be dashboard. For now we don't need to add it to the navigation, but let's go back to login. After we update the user state, we want to navigate to dashboard. So we can do that using another hook in React, and that is a use navigate hook. So let me make comments here and say use navigate hook, and we can create a navigate variable and set it to use navigate hook from a React router DOM. And I'm going to move it up here so it is organized. So this gives us a function that allows us to navigate to different pages. When the user is logged in and the state is updated, I'm going to navigate to / dashboard. I notice I made a typo here, so I'm just going to fix it. Navigate, and also down here, navigate to dashboard. And then I'm going to copy this and paste it in the register component right after updating the user state. So this navigate doesn't exist here, so we can copy it from login. So we can just get these 2 lines of code and in the register, paste it here, then import use navigate from React router DOM, and that's it. Save this one. Let's get rid of the local storage and go to login, say john@email.com. So add the email and the password, press login, we go to the dashboard, and the information is added to the local storage. And that's our login and register. So next we want to focus on posts. All right, so let's close all of these documents. Now let's start with posts pages. And in the pages folder, I'm going to create another folder, call it posts. Then inside that folder, I will have a home component and start here. So let's create the function home, set it to an arrow function that is going to return home, and then export default that component. So inside our app, we need to just add the route, and the path for this one is actually going to be the same as this. So we can just call it index. That means this is our home page. So it's going to have the same path. Maybe we can move it up there since this is the index page. And the element that is going to render is going to be our home component. So save it, go back to home page, we get that text. Right here, we want to fetch all the posts from our database. And I have only one post in my database, so I think that'll do the job. So let's start by creating some HTML first. So inside the home component, I'm going to return a section with the class name of card. Then I will add an h1 that is going to be our title and says latest posts. So for the h1, we can have the class name of title. Then we will have our posts here. So we need to fetch the posts from our database. So there are a few steps we need to take to grab the posts, and it's going to be like what we did with the user. So we need a global state, and we also need the functions or a controller to make the API calls. So let's start there. So in the controllers folder, I'm going to create a new file, call it posts controller. And again, it's going to be a JS file. And let me grab this comment. And first, we want to get all the posts. So let's create a function, and I'm going to call it get posts. Again, it's going to be async. And first, I'm going to export get posts. So this one is quite easy because we don't have to check for anything, and the get posts API is public. So we can just create our response object and use the await keyword and then fetch from our endpoint. So we called it /API /posts. And the method is get, so we don't need to add any options. Then we need to create our JSON data. So again, we can say await and then grab the response and use the JSON function. Then we can check if the response was not okay, then throw an error and use our data to grab the error, whatever the error is, and is coming from the backend. Then we are going to return that data. That's it. So that is our getting all the posts function. So let's go back to the home component. We want to grab those posts when the component loads. So we can use the use effect hook. And this hook fires up when the component loads or mounts to the DOM. So this takes a callback function and then as a second argument, an array of dependencies. So we want to pass an empty array because I just want to run this once. If I don't do this, this use effect is going to run every time the state changes. That's not exactly what I want. So anyway, now we want to use this get post, but this is returning a promise and we cannot make this function async. So we can either create another function here and invoke that function inside this, or we can use a set timeout. So I'm going to use a set timeout because later on I want to add a spinner. And because we are using the local database, there is no waiting time and everything happens in an instant. So having a spinner doesn't really show anything. So using a set timeout, we can kind of show a delay in an API call. Anyway, so this is just a simple JavaScript set timeout function. So we just want to pass a callback function here and invoke it maybe after 500 milliseconds. For now, I'm just going to do it very quickly. Later on, we can increase this. Inside this curly brackets, we can just invoke our get posts function. So like I said, this is returning a promise. So we want to say await and change this to async. So this works because this is a function inside the use effect. So we need to do something with these posts. Let's save it inside a data object, and for now let's just console.log. So I'm just going to add log here and say data. So if I save this one, we should get our post in the console. There we go. We have an object that has a post property with an array, and inside that array we have only one post. This is the post from our database, this one. So we are getting the post, but now we need to create another global state for our posts so we can update that and use that state for our posts. And it's going to be the same as users contacts. So in the contacts folder, I will create a new file, call it post contacts. And again, it's going to be JSX. So let's create our contacts first. Post contacts and set it to create contacts from React. And of course, we need to export this. Then let's create our component. I'm going to call it post provider. And same as our user context, we are going to accept children, and we are going to create our posts state. This is going to be an use state hook. So we have post and set posts. Now this is going to be even easier than the users because we would have only an array of posts. So we can just set the initial value to an empty array. Then we can return our post contacts provider and accept the children inside these two tags and just expose that posts and set posts as the value of our provider. So all the components would have access to these two items, and we just have to export this one as well. Okay, so that is our post contacts and provider, and we have to do the same thing as we did with the user context. So we need to wrap our app with this post context. So in the main JSX file, we can import post provider and move the closing tag under user provider. So you can see what's happening here. It's a tree of components, if you will, and it doesn't matter which one goes first because we are just exposing the information to the app, which contains all the other components. All right, let's save this one. And we don't need the post context anymore, so we can close this one too. And in our home component, instead of saying console.log data, we want to update that post array. So let's grab it using the use context hook. So we want to grab posts and set posts and set it to use contacts, then pass that post contacts in here. I can see VS Code doesn't want to recognize that, so let's import it manually. Import post contacts from, we need to go out 2 steps to the contacts folder and post contacts. So right after we get the posts, we want to update the posts state. So using this set post function, we want to set it to data.posts. This is giving us an array, right? So we just want that array with whatever is in it. So now our posts is that array. So down here, maybe if I log that post, let's see what we get. So you can see at first we get an empty array, and then we call the database, and then we fill that array with our posts. So we will create a component for this, but first let's have it on the screen. So we want to check if the posts array actually has something. So if it's not null, then map over it. So posts dot map, and we want to say for each post in that array, maybe render a div for us where the key is going to be post dot underscore id, and inside this div we will have a post component that is going to accept a post prop. This post that we are mapping over is going to be the prop that this post component expect. So let's create it inside our components folder and call it post. And we just want to say const post is going to be an arrow function, but we have a prop and that is called a post that is going to return, let's just say post.title. And I'm going to get rid of that warning by adding that comment. Let's export default our post component. Save it, go back to the home and retype this post. So VS Code will auto import it and save it. So we get post blog as the title of our post. Okay, so let's give it a better look. So in the post component file, and I realized the name is starting with a small p, it should be a capital P. So let's make sure that is fixed in here too. So in the home component as well. Right now VS Code is not happy with this change name because it still recognized the post with a small p, but doesn't matter, it works. Anyway, inside our post component, we want to create a div instead of this empty tag. So let's start with a div. this wrapper should have a margin bottom of 4. So inside this div, we will have another div, then another div. Inside this third div, we will have an h2 with post.title. Under that, we will have a p tag with post.created at. So if I save this one, we get the date as this weird looking date. So we can use JavaScript date functions to format this. So I want to say new date, and then inside this new date, I want to pass that post.created at property. Then change it to local data string, and this is a function. We just have to invoke it, save it. So we get a date like this. Looks much better. Okay, for the title, let's add font bold. Let's make the text larger and change the color. And we can also change the first letter. So if we grab the first letter pseudo selector and just say uppercase. For the date, we are going to make the text super duper small. So I want to pass an arbitrary value, so 10 pixel using the brackets, and make the color less bright. Under this wrapper, I want to have another div. For now, I'm just going to pass OK, and I'll explain in a moment why. This is the header for the post. And then in here, we will have a p tag, and let's set the text to small. And inside that p tag, we just have the post body. And under each post, I want to have a line. So if I add border bottom like that, you can see we have this line, which is kind of ugly, and I don't want it. I want to create my own line or separator. So I want to create a div, which is going to be empty, but with CSS, we are going to style it. So height is going to be just 1 pixel. Width is going to be full. The background is going to be a gradient to right or to left. It doesn't matter. And the color, you can choose the colors, but we are going to start from maybe indigo 50 via indigo 500, then again to indigo 50. So if I save it, you can see we get this nice line, and we can just play with the margin. So let's say margin top 6, and there we go. And maybe change this to 6 as well. So it's going to be the same amount between two posts. You can play with these numbers, of course. So if that's too bright, you can add /60. That's going to be the opacity, so 60%. Anyway, let's go back to this OK thingy that I added here. So first, let's add some classes here. Flex, items start, and justify between. That is that div. Now, the reason I'm adding this, because when we go to the user's dashboard, I want to give the ability to the users to delete and update, but not to all the users. So if you are on the home page, you don't see those buttons. But when you go to your dashboard, you will see them. So this is going to be a placeholder. So I can use that as special children component or prop. And then later on, I want to add things in here. So for now, we can just accept it up here as a prop. So children, and save it. We don't see anything because we are not passing anything. But if we go back to homepage where we have the post, instead of a self-closing tag, if I add a closing tag like this and add something here, you can see it appears there. Anyway, that's our post component. And in fact, I just wanted to add some margin top for the post body. So margin top 4. That's good. I can close this one. So next thing, I want to add that spinner, because right now when we reload, we have a 500 millisecond delay. So let's add a spinner. And I'm going to add some comment here, call it loading state. So we will use the state hook. So let's call it loading and set loading and set it to use state. So at first it's going to be true. When you load the page, it's going to be loading. And then when we grab the data and we update our global state, we want to set the loading to false. Let me make some comments here. Okay, so I added some comments here, and I want to use this loading in the markup. So maybe right after this h1, I want to say if loading is true and use the logical operator, and let's have some markup. For now, let's just add a p tag and say loading. If I refresh, we get loading, and then we get the post. So if we change this to 1 second, so we have more time to see it, there we go. Now, instead of this, of course, I want to add a spinner. So let's go to Font Awesome and search for spin. So I'm going to grab this first one and copy this I tag, just replace this loading with that I tag. So I don't need the P tag too. So I'm going to get rid of that P tag and add some classes. So first, I'm going to add the animated spin. So this is a tailwind class that will make that item to spin. Then I want to make it larger, make sure it is centered, and it is displayed as block. So let's change this class to class name, of course. So save this one, give it a refresh, we get our spinner and our posts. So of course, these are all preference. You can design them the way you want. So that is our home page. Next, we want to do the user dashboard page. So we need to grab the user's posts. All right, so the user dashboard page is going to be kind of the same, but with more functionalities, of course, because we want to give the ability to the users to delete and update the post. Let's start with dashboard component. So we already have this inside our users page, and we want to replace this with a section first. Let's give it a class of card. Then inside this section, we will have an h1 that says user dashboard with the class of title. Let's save this. We need to manually go to dashboard because we still don't have the link for it. So we will update our navbar after we are done with the dashboard. So basically, what we want to do here is the same as the home page. So we want to grab the posts from the API and then show it here. Let's do that first. So let's take this step by step. So inside our post controller, I'm going to copy that line of comment and say get user posts. Then we want to create a function. Let's call it get user posts. And again, it's going to be async. We are going to create a response object and then use the fetch API and use the endpoint for users posts. So it's API posts user. Now, if you recall, this endpoint requires an authorization key in the headers. So we need to add that in the options as a second argument for the fetch API function. So we can add the authorization key, and for the value, I want to use the backticks because remember, the authorization key would have the bearer string first and then the token. So we need a token here, and we are saving the token inside the local storage. So inside this template syntax, we can just pass local storage dot get item and then the key we provided here, so it's token. So then we need to create our JSON data, so we can just say res.json, and I forgot to add await, sorry. And if everything is successful, we will return it. But if their response was not okay, then we will do something else. We will throw an error with the data error property. But if it is successful, we are just going to return the data. All right, so let's export this one and see if it works. So get user posts, and we just have to call this inside our dashboard component. So let's go there. So this is going to be like the home page, and we want to grab the posts on the page load. So we want to use the use effect from React, pass the callback function here, and we add that empty array so it would be called only once. And inside this use effect, we want to do the same thing as the home page. So again, I want to use the set timeout and make it async. Then let's say 500 millisecond, and we want to await for get user posts. So I'm going to save this inside a data variable and then log that data. Let's see how this works. I'm going to save this one, and we are getting authorization token not found. So I made a mistake somewhere. Let me check. So in the get user function, so we are getting the user's authorization. I'm sorry, this should be inside the headers. So we want to say headers, then add the options, then set the authorization key to that one. There we go. Now we are getting the object with user post that has one array, which is empty for this user, and then the email. So this user John doesn't have any posts. And if we maybe log in with the other user, we will get one post. So we will do that in a moment. But this is the, so make sure you add the header. I forgot to do it. So that was a mistake. Sorry. Let's go back to dashboard, and I'm going to delete this token and email and go back to login page, give it a refresh so we don't have those warnings and errors, and log in with this Mike user. So mike@email.com, and the password is 321 again. So press log in. We are back to dashboard, and immediately we get the user's post that is an array with one post, and then the user's email. So right now you can see this data is giving us an object. Let's destructure that. So we want to say user posts, and then the other one is email, right? And let's console.log user posts and email. So if I save this one and go down here, we get two logs. One is an array, the other one is the email. Now we want to update that global user state. Remember in our user context, we said our user state is going to have an email, which is the same here, and the post array. So we can update this with the information we have in our dashboard now. Maybe before that console.log, we want to update the user state. So let's grab it first. I'm going to make a comment here and say use that user context, and we want to destructure it. So say user and set user. It's going to use the context hook, and the context we want to use is user context. I'm going to add some line here. Now down here, we want to set that user to a new object. So we know we have an email and posts. So the posts is going to be this user's post up here. And the email, of course, is going to be email. So because they have the same name, we don't have to repeat it. So we can just update the user state with this statement. So let me make some comments again. So, all right, so now we can actually use this user posts and output it on the screen. So let's move this console.log outside of that use effect. And I'm just going to output user. So this is coming from our context, right? Save it. We get an object where the email is Mike, and we have an array of posts. So we want to check if the user posts exist or it is not null, then we want to just map over it and output a post component. So user posts dot map, and for each post we want to render a div element where the key is going to be post underscore ID, and inside that div we will have the post component that we created. So this time I'm going to close it like this. So this component expect a prop, and that is a post. So we can just pass post from this map function. So let me format it so it looks much better. Okay, so let's save this one. We get the one blog post from Mike. And you notice there is no indication who is this user. So we can just simply add the user email down here. So under the h1, maybe I will have a p tag that just says user.email. So we get Mike up there. Maybe I can add it before the h1 because this one has a margin bottom. Save it. We get Mike at email. We can just leave it as it is, or you can style it the way you want. At least we have an indication that this is Mike's dashboard. So in this post component, I want to have two buttons. So you remember, if we add anything here, it's going to go to this spot. So we want two icons. One for deleting a post and one is going to the update page. So that means one of them is going to be a link, the other one is just going to be a button. So let's add this one. So I'm going to have a div here, and inside this div I will add a link component from React Router DOM and then a button. I'm going to close this link tag just like the button because it just makes more sense. So for this link, we want an icon. So let me add the class name, and it's going to be an edit icon kind of thing. So let's go back to Font Awesome, search for edit, and maybe this pen square. So I can just grab this and go back here, paste it. I actually just want the class, want to cut it, paste it here, and get rid of that I element. So that's our update button. Then I'm going to copy this, add it to the button down here, and then change the name to trash-can. Let's style these. For the link, I want the same style as the nav links, but of course I want to change some of them, so we can override them by saying text green 500. So hover bg green 200. So that is our update. I'm just going to copy these three classes and paste it down here and change the text color to red and the hover background to red as well. So on the wrapper, which is this div, I'm going to apply some classes. So flex, items center, and gap 2. Okay, so that's our icons. So let me format the code. Now for the link, I want to add some other properties. First, it's going to have a title. Then of course, the to attribute to /update. We don't have this page at the moment, but later on I will create it. So that's our link. For the button, also I want a title that says delete and an unclick event. So we want to execute a function. Let's call it handle delete. And I'm using this anonymous function way because I want to pass the post underscore ID. So let's create this handle delete up here. So I'm going to get rid of this console.log and say const handle delete. It's going to accept an ID and just console.log that ID. Okay, so let's save this one. Let's click on the delete button. We get the ID of this post. So this will come in handy when we want to delete the post. So let's make a comment, handle delete post. So when we refresh the page, we don't have any indication that is updating. So we need that spinner from home page. So let's create a loading state. Let's call it loading state. And we want to create a loading variable and the set loading function to update that and set it to use state, which at first is going to be true. So when we update the user state, we want to set the loading to false. Set loading, and we just want to pass false here. Now I'm going to go back to the home page and just grab this loading statement here, so this block of code, and go back to dashboard and paste it right under this h1. Paste and refresh. We get our loading and then the post. That is grabbing the user's post. Now let's focus on navigation, because right now it doesn't say if the user is logged in or logged out, because right now it still says log in and register. So we want to update this, and it's going to be quite easy. So let's do that. For now, let's close everything and go to layout and start here. Basically, we just want to show these links conditionally. Like this home page is going to be visible no matter if the user is logged in or not. And the rest is going to be based on the condition if the user is logged in or if the email exists in the local storage, then they can see certain icons or certain routes. We need to grab the user state. So let's create a variable and destructure user and a set user. And you can see that the context is coming handy because we are grabbing it from all these components that they need to have access to that global state. So we want to use the use context from React and then use the user context here. Again, VS Code doesn't want to import that. So let's say user contexts, go out one folder to the context folder and user context. So if I just log this user, we get email as Mike and posts. So that is going to be our check to see if the user is logged in. So if the user email exists, that means they are logged in. So we can make this block of code conditional. So let's add the brackets around it and say if user email is true, then render something. I'm going to add parentheses here. Otherwise, render login and register. So we need to wrap this inside parentheses and make sure we add some empty div here for now. So this will not give us an error. So if the email exists on this user state, that means they are logged in, and we are going to show them the dashboard, the create, post, and log out. But if they are not logged in, we are going to show them the login and register. So that means they need to log in. Now, if I save this one, they go away because the user is logged in and we don't have any icons at the moment. So let's just add some icons here. I'm going to copy these classes first and add it to this div. Then I'm going to copy one of these links and add it up here. So the first one is going to be create post, and it'll go to the create page, and the rest is the same except the icon. So I just want a plus icon. Let's go back here and search for add. I want this one, for example. Let's just add it here, save. And you can see because the user is logged in, they can create a post. Let's copy this and add it one more time. We need a dashboard. That's the title. It's going to go to the dashboard. And for the icon, maybe we use this one. I don't know what's the icon for the dashboard, but that looks fine. Now for the logout, we don't need a link, we need a button. So let's add a button here. We need a title attribute that says logout. We also need onClick event listener. So I'm going to pass handle logout, and we will create it up there in a moment. Then we need the class names. We can copy these class names and just paste it here. And we need to change this name. So we can go back to Font Awesome and just search for logout. And this is the one we want. So copy and paste it here. So let me create this handle logout function because it will give us an error if we don't. All right, so it's just an empty function for now. Let me format the code. It looks like this, save it, and we get three icons up there. If we hover over it, it says create, the other one says dashboard and logout. And since we are here, let's actually add the functionality for logging out because this is quite easy. We just have to clear this storage and reset the state. So inside this function, first we want to set the user. So we want to reset the state, right? So we can use the set user and pass an object. We can set the email to null and post to an empty array. So basically we are just setting the state to nothing. That means the user doesn't exist. So they are not logged in. Then we need to delete these from the storage. Otherwise, if we refresh the page, then it's going to be set again. That means they are logged in. There are two ways to do this. We can either just use the local storage clear. This will delete everything in the storage. But if there are other keys or other values in the storage that are actually needed for the application, it's going to delete them as well. We can be specific. We can just use the remove item and pass the key we want to remove. So we want to remove the email and the token. So we want to make sure the token and the email is removed. Then we want to navigate them back to the home page because, for example, if they are on the dashboard and they log out, they're going to get an error because the email doesn't exist anymore. So we want to navigate them back to the dashboard or to the home page, sorry. So we want to use the use navigate hook. So let's create a navigate property here or variable and set it to use navigate from React hook. And after we reset the state and clean local storage, we want to navigate to the home page. And I made a mistake again. Okay. Now, of course, if we click here Let's see. You see it's gone and we are back to home page and we see those links because now I have to log in again. So let's log in again and I'm going to use Mike guy, mikeemail.com and 321 and log in. Okay, so we are back to dashboard and we can add a confirm message to this one. So you can say if, then use the confirm from JavaScript, say confirm logout. Question mark. So if this is true, then do all of this. Otherwise, don't do anything. This is just an extra step to avoid accidental clicks. So if I accidentally click on this logout, I don't want to log out immediately. I want to have this question. Now, this is just the simplest dialog we can have, but you can, of course, use JavaScript packages that offer a nicer dialog. All right, so that is with the layouts and the navigation. The next step is to add the create post page. So when the user goes to this page, which doesn't exist at this point, we want to give him the ability to create a post. And I'm going to delete this console.log. All right, let's start with creating a post. All right, so in the posts folder, I'm going to create a new file, call it create.jsx. So let's create the function, call it create. And again, we want to return a section with the class name card. Then we need to export default create. Let's go to our app component and add the route, maybe after the dashboard. And don't worry about these routes. We will come back to this to organize them and protect them later on. But for now, we just want to add the routes. So create, and it's going to render the create component. Okay, save it. And if we go to this link now, we should have our empty card. This is going to be a form like login and register. So we can have an H1 that says create a new post. Then under that H1, we will have a form. We don't need the action, of course. Then inside the form, we will have an input field of type text and a placeholder that says post title. Then a class name of input. We already have this class, so we just have to add it. And there we go. This input field is going to be autofocus. Then we need a text area. We don't need any of these properties. So we can get rid of them and add a placeholder that says post content and a class name of input. If I save this one, that's what we get. Let me add the title class to that H1, and we can make this post text area bigger by adding the rows attributes. Maybe let's pass maybe 7 or maybe 6. That's too big. Then we need a button that is just going to say create, and the class for this is btn. Okay, so we need an error state first. So let's create it. Error state const error set error. And of course, we are going to use the use state hook. At first, it's going to be null. Then we need our form data state or just form data. And let's create a title and a set title. This is again one of those places that you can choose. You want to add an object and have all of these states in it, or just do it one by one. So let's do it one by one and use the state, and we will have a body and set body. Then let's create a function for handle create. So we need to grab the event because we need to prevent the default. So prevent default on the event. And now let's attach these to the form elements. So on the form itself, we want to say unsubmit. We want to handle create. For the input title, we can set the value to title, and on change event, it's going to be set title and grab the event target value. Then I'm going to copy these two lines and paste it for this input field. Change the value to body and the function to set body. To test it out, let's just console.log title and body. Save it and give it a refresh and add some title here and number and create, and it works. Now, when we submit the form, we actually want to add the data or this post to our database. So we need to create a function in our post controller. So again, I'm going to copy this line of comment in the post controller, add it here, and change this to create posts. I'm going to call it create post. And we are going to accept a title and a body. So let's export it first, and then let's add the functionality. So the first step, like with the user and register, I want to check if the title and the body are not empty. So let's add if title and body are empty, then throw an error that says all fields are required. That's the first step. Then we want to create our response object and await for the fetch. So make sure this is async. I forgot to add it. So again, we want to use the fetch API, and this time we want to go to /API/posts. Then we need to add the options to specify the method that is going to be post. Then we need the headers that is going to include the content type as well as the authorization. So I'm going to grab the authorization from this get user post and just add it here. But we also need the content type. So let's say content dash type is going to be application JSON, because if we don't set this one, our Express middleware will not interpret this title and body the way we want. So then we need to set the body. So we need to send that title and body in the request body. So we want to use JSON stringify and send title and body as an object. All right, so if that is successful, we want to create a const data that is going to be our JSON data. Then again, await response.json. And just like what we do in every function, we are going to check if the response is not okay, then throw an error, otherwise return the data. That's it. That is our create post function. So let's save this one, go back to create component. So we need to call our create post method in here. So let's use a try catch block again. And in here, we want to create our data variable and set it to await create post. So this expects a title and a body. And make sure this function is async up here. Now, if this is successful, I'm going to just console.log the data. If it is not, we are going to set the error to error message. And we need to show this error somewhere. So just like with login and register, right under the form, I'm going to check if the error state is true, then render an alert component where the message is going to be that error. Now, VS Code again didn't import this for me, so I need to do it manually. So let's go up here and say import alert from components alert. All right, so let's test this out. In our create post page, I'm going to just press create. We get all fields required. Let's add a post. So let's say post 2 and just add some text here. Now this would expect a token here. Let's tamper with this token. So instead of this E, I'm going to pass number 2 and press create. Let's see what happens. We get invalid token, of course. So let's change it back to E, so it should be correct, and press create. So we get this success message in the console. That's what we have here. And then the post that was created. And if we check our database, we should have a new post now. And the user is the same. So this is the Mike guy. And again, we could have an indicator somewhere here that says this is Mike, but I think it's already in the dashboard and we don't need it. And in fact, when we create a post successfully, we want to navigate the user back to dashboard after updating the global state. So let's do that now. I'm going to make comments here and say create a new post. Then we are going to update the post state. Then we are going to navigate to dashboard. So to update the state, we need to bring in the post's contexts. So let's say const posts and set posts. And we are going to use the use context hook again and pass that post context. And I notice VS Code is not helping me anymore with the imports. I don't know why. So import post context from context folder. So this should do it. And down here, we want to set the posts to a new array. So remember that our posts state right here is just an array. Right? And we want to use the same array and then add this new post to it. So we can spread the posts as it is and then add this new post. So we can say data.post. That is coming from here. So it's an object which is going to be added to this array. Then we need to navigate to dashboard. So we need to import the navigate hook. So let me make comments here again. Create a navigate variable. Set it to use navigate from React. So I need to manually import that up there. Anyway, so after we are done with that, we are just going to say navigate to dashboard. Let's refresh. Let's go to the dashboard first. So this Mike guy has 2 posts, and you can see this post 2 is the newest. That's because of the sort method we use on our backend. So let's create another one. So let's say newest post and add some gibberish here and press create. So we are back here and the post is shown up. And if we go to the home page, we also have here, and it also checks for the new posts. All right, so that is our create post functionality. Next, we want to add the delete functionality. So this is going to be quite easy. So let's close this one. We don't need this create component anymore. And inside our posts controller, let's create our delete function first. So again, I'm gonna copy this line of code and paste it down here and just say delete posts or post. Let's create a function for it and call it delete post. And we need to accept an ID. So we can either pass an ID like this or with an underscore, which is the convention for MongoDB. So I would just use this syntax. We want to make sure this is async again. Then we want to create our response object. So let's use the fetch again. And this time we want to go to a dynamic route. So we want to use backticks because we want to have a template string and go to /API /posts, then / a dynamic value. So in this case, we want to pass that ID. Then we need to pass the options to set the headers. We need to set the method to delete like that. Then we need the authorization header. So I'm going to copy this and paste it down here. We don't need the content type, so we can get rid of that. The rest is going to be the same. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it down here. Again, we wait for the JSON data. Then we check if the response is not okay. We throw an error. Otherwise, we return the data. So let's just export this one, delete post. And let's go back to dashboard where we have the delete button and we have the function up here. So in this function, we want to try to delete a post. Again, we want to add that try catch block, and I want to change this ID to _ID as well to be the same as posts ID. You can see here, they all have the underscore. So let's create our data variable and set it to await. That means, again, we have to make this async. I keep forgetting that. And then we want to call that delete post. So this delete post expect an ID. So we can just pass the ID from here. And at this point, we don't have any success or error messages to show to the user. We can add that in a moment, but let's just see if we can delete a post successfully. So if there is an error, we are going to, for now, just console.log error.message. Now, if this is successful, we are going to delete that post from our database, but that is not going to update our user state. So up here, we already grabbed the user state. So we just want to update it when we delete a post. So let's create a new posts array here, and I'm going to set it to user, which we are grabbing it up here, right? So user posts and then filter it. So filter, we know this filter method, which is a JavaScript method, is going to return an array based on a condition. So we want to check for all the posts and see if the post ID is not the same as the ID up here, then return it. Otherwise, don't. So we will have a new array with all the posts that the ID don't match. So we will remove that particular post. All right, so then we need to grab the set user, and this is an object again, and we just want to update the posts. So we can just use the spread operator on the user itself. That means whatever is in the user object already, and then update the posts. So we want to say posts is going to be new posts, and the email is going to be whatever the email is. We don't care about the email at this point. All right, so that's it. So we have 3 posts. And if we check our database, we have 3 posts. And I want to delete this post 2. Let's go back here, and I'm going to press the delete button. There we go. It's gone, and it is immediately updated because of this statement right here. If we don't have it, we have to wait for a page refresh. So the post is gone, and if we check our database, it is gone from our database too. So it is working the way we want. We just have to show a success message if it is successful and an error message if there is an error. So let's create 2 states here. I'm going to have an error state and a success state. So this should be very easy at this point. So we want an error, a set error. We want to use the use state hook. At first, it's going to be null, and we want to repeat this for the success. So just change the name. All right. So we do have an error component, but we don't have a success one, and we will create it in a moment. But let's go to our handle delete function. So after we delete the post, it's going to be a success. So we want to set the success message to data.success, because we know this will give us a success message that says post was deleted, and that's what we want, and that's what we called it in our backend. But if there is an error, we want to set the error to error.message. All right, so we need to show these somewhere on the page, maybe right under the H1 after this loading. So first, I want to check if that success has anything in it, then show me this component, and I'm going to call it success. I don't have it at this time, but we will create it in a moment. And just like our alert component, we will expect a message, and the message that we want to show is just this success. Now we want to copy this and add it down here. Just change this to alert and change these success messages to error. So if there is an error, we want to show the error message. So let's go back up and import these components. First, we need to import alert. We already have this one. So from components, and it's alert. Then we need to create that success. In the components folder, I'm just going to copy the alert and then paste it in the component folder. So this is going to duplicate it. And then I'm going to change the name to success. And in the component itself, I'm going to change the name to success. Change this red color to green. And the icon, maybe we should show just this check mark. So it was okay. So let's copy it and paste it here. And we are adding that message here. So go back to dashboard and import it. So I'm just going to duplicate this line and change this name to success. And since I'm up here, I'm going to organize this, and I think we're good. So we have only 2 posts. First, I'm going to create one. So let's say 1 and 1. Create. So there we go. Let's delete it. Delete. The post was deleted. And we could actually add some margin bottom here. So that would be quite easy. So we just have to go to these components. On the div itself, we can say margin bottom 4. We can do the same thing for alert, margin bottom 4. Now, every time I delete a post, this is going to show up. But you notice it's not going away. Now, the alert message, it makes sense to stay on the page because we want to give the time to the user to address that error message. But for the success, we want to make sure that it goes away after a certain time. So let's add some functionality to this one. So we can create a show variable or state here inside the success component. So we want to say show and set show and use the state hook. Then we want to set a timeout here, and we just want to set the show to false after 1500 millisecond, maybe 2 seconds. So at first, it's going to be true. That means showing. Now we want to make this whole thing conditional. So I'm going to cut this, add a div, and inside this div, I want to say if show is true, then show me this component. So let's save it and close this, refresh. Let's delete this post block. So delete, we get this for 2 seconds and it's gone. And that is deleting a post. Next, we want to cover updating a post. All right, so we are almost towards the end. Let's create a file inside our posts folder, and I'm going to call it update.jsx. So this is going to be very much like the create page. So let's go to create page and just copy everything and paste it here. And let's go through the things we need to change. First, we need to change this to update, and then down here where we export it, so update. So we need the post context, we need the navigate hook, we need the error state, we need the form data, and of course we need a function to handle update. So instead of handle create, we just want to say handle update. And I'm going to comment this whole try catch block because I want to test things out before doing anything. And let's make sure on the submit for the form, we want to change this to handle update. All right, so let's go to our app component and add a route for updates. I'm going to duplicate this line and change this to update. And the component, of course, it's going to be update. So let's go back to dashboard. This link that goes to update should work now. Let's press on this green icon and we are in the update page. We need to change that text back in the update component. This H1 that says create a new post, we want to say update your post. Now we need to find a way to fill in these 2 fields from the post that user selects. Basically, on the dashboard, when I click on this update button, I have access to this post. So the ID, the title, and everything. And I want to send this over to the update page. And we can do that using a state on the link component. So in the dashboard, our update button is a link, and we can easily send the data to the new location using a state prop. So we can just pass state here. So this state is expecting an object, and we can send anything we want. Let's say I want to send a name variable that is going to be John. Okay. In order to grab this in our update page, we have another hook we can use. So right here, when we use the use navigate from React Router DOM, we have another hook from React Router, and that is use location. Let's create a location variable and set it to use location from React Router DOM, and it is auto imported for me. And all I'm going to do here, I'm just going to log that location, see what we get. Save it and press on the update button here. And down here in the console, we have this object that has path name, hash, yada, 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 but we have state that says name John. So this is what we want. We can destructure it. So instead of saying location, I can say state like that, and then just use that one in my console.log and save it and go back to dashboard and click on this update button again, and we get name John. So of course, instead of sending this name, we can just send the post, and we can send the whole post. just like that. Now, if I again go back here, press the update button, you can see I have access to the whole post, including the ID, the title, and so on. So I can easily update these input fields. So back to the update component, I can delete this console.log, and where we have our use state hooks, that is for our form data, our initial value is an empty string. So we can just use that state.title for the title and state.body for the body. That's it. And you can see it's already filled in. So now when the user comes in to update their post, the values are already here the way it should be. And the rest of the functionality is going to be almost the same. So now we want to create an update function to update the post and save it into our database. So let's go back to post controller. Again, I'm going to copy that comment and just change this to update. Then create the update post method, set it to an async function, and we are going to expect 3 parameters here. The first one is going to be ID, then the title, then the body. So not only we are submitting some new data, but we need to check that the user is authorized to do this task. So first we want to check if these fields are not empty. So I'm going to grab this condition from create post and paste it down here. Then we need to call our database. So let's create our response object. We want to wait for the fetch. And just like this delete method, we need this dynamic URL. So I'm going to copy it and paste it here. Then let's add the options. This time, the method is going to be put because in our backend, we specified the route for updating is going to be a put request. Then we need the headers with the content type as well as the authorization because we do have a middleware on this route. So we can grab this from the create post and we can grab everything actually. Let's just grab the headers and the body because that's what we are going to do. So we check for the token in the local storage, and also if everything goes well, we will submit the title and the body in the request body. Okay, so the rest as usual is going to be the same. We are just repeating these 3 lines in every function. That's it. That is our update function. So let's just export it. Update post. All right, so let's go back to update component. I'm going to bring back this try catch block, change this to update a post, and instead of saying create post, we want to say update post. So this one expects an ID and the title and the body. We already have the title and the body. We don't have the ID. So we already have access to this state which contains the ID of the post, right? So we can just say state dot underscore ID. So that is for updating the post. And if it is successful, we are updating our global state of the posts that is already imported up here. And then we navigate back to dashboard so the user can see their updated post. And if there is an error, we are going to show the error which is included down here. So we just have to get rid of this create post because we don't need it anymore. Everything should work the way we want. So let me go back to homepage first. Then I'm going to go to dashboard. So we have this Mike guy and he has a new post. So if we check our database, we have this newest post and we want to update this. So let's do that. I want to click on this button, which is the update. Then I want to say newest post updated and add some more text down here. Press create. We are back to dashboard and it is updated. And if we check our database, it is submitted and successfully done. To check other things, for example, if we don't have a body, we will get an error that says all fields are required. Or if we tamper with the token, let's say I want to change that to 3 and add some body and press create. We should change this, by the way, and we get invalid token. So change this back to E. Let's just change this text. So in the update component down here, we just have to say update. Okay, so back to home page, back to dashboard, and we're good. So we are almost done with everything. So I'm going to test everything here. First, I'm going to log out and says, okay, I'm going to register a new user first. And the email, I'm going to say john@example.com. The password, I'm going to say 321 and then maybe 3211. So I get passwords do not match, of course, 321. So let's register. So we have John example with no posts. And we could also add a message here. These are just finishing touches. We could add a message here that if there are no posts, then just say there are no posts. But these are just very easy things. And if we check our database, users, we have john@example.com. Let's create a post with this John. So go to create and say John's post and just some text and press create. We are back to dashboard with our post. In the homepage, we have 2 posts. One is mine and the other one is this Mike guy, I believe. So back to dashboard, I want to update this. So let's say update it, update, we get it. Let's say I want to delete it and it's gone. So we could add a dialog that says, are you sure you want to delete this post? And that could be easily done here. So we can just say if confirm and say confirm delete. So if that is successful, then do all of this. So we want to include everything in this if block. So let's save it. Let's create another post for this John guy and press create. And I want to delete it. It says, do you want to? Nope. But I do want to. Okay, it's gone. All right, so everything works the way we want. So our API functionality is there. So the last thing I want to cover is protecting our routes. So right now in our app, we have the routes just sitting there. And you can see, for example, I'm logged in. If I go to log in here manually, there is nothing stopping me. And if I log out, so you can see there's no token, there's no email. But if I go to /create, again, I can access that page, even though this page needs authorization. Now, it's not a big deal because I cannot make a post. If I try, it's going to give me an error because there is no token. This is coming from JSON Web Token. But you have to protect these routes so the user wouldn't even be able to access these routes. So that's what we are going to do for our last thing. Okay, so I'm going to close everything again. And to protect the routes, we can have a check here. That would work. But a good way would be to use a custom route component. In the source directory, I'm going to create another folder and call it routes. So we can call it whatever we want. And inside that, I will have an auth routes.jsx, then a guest routes.jsx. Okay, so in the auth routes, we want to create a component. I'm going to call it auth routes, set it to an arrow function, of course. And in here, we want to return components based on a condition, and the condition is the user. So we want to bring in user from the contexts. So let's say const user. We don't need the set user, we just need the user. And use the use context from React and bring in our user context. We want to return two different things. So if the user email is true and valid, we want to have an outlet component. So this is from React Router DOM, right? And remember, this outlet is a placeholder for whatever goes in here. So for React Router routes. And if it is not correct, if this is false, so that means the user is not logged in, then we want to navigate using the navigate component. So not the use navigate hook, but the navigate component from a React Router DOM. So we want to navigate to login page because the user needs to log in order to access those pages that needs authorization. So let's export this so we can use it in our app. We will go back to the guest in a moment. It's going to be 99% the same. So let's go back to app, and we want to wrap the auth routers with that custom components. So after the home page, because this is a page that everyone can access regardless of their login status. So I want to use another route here, and the element that is going to render is going to be that auth routes. So now we can ask ourselves which pages need to be authorized, and these three routes, right? So I can put them all inside this auth route container. Let's do the guest part and then we will test it out. I just want to copy everything from auth routes and paste it inside guest routes. Let's just change this to guest routes, and we just want to negate this and say if the user email doesn't exist, then render that route. Otherwise, go to dashboard. That means the user is logged in and we want to go to the dashboard. So let's save this one and close it and go back to the app. So we want to have another route wrapper that is going to render that element for us. So this time we want guest routes, and the import didn't work, so let's do it manually. We just want to change this to guest routes. All right, so and the pages that are guest routes are these two, login and register. Okay, let's test this out. Right now, I am not logged in. That means I cannot go to the dashboard. Let's try to do it manually. So dashboard, press enter, we are redirected to login. The same thing goes for create and update. So if I try to go to create, we are back to logged in. So let's actually log in. So I'm going to go to the login page and say john@example.com, and the password was 321, I believe. Okay, yeah, that was correct. So this is my page. So I am logged in, I can see here, but if I want to go back to the login page again, I am back to dashboard. So even if I'm on the create page, I want to go to register. I'm back to dashboard. So this is basically how you can protect React routes and avoid unintended problems. Again, it's not going to be a big problem anyway because you are still checking everything in the backend, and that is the best way to check for authorization and certain tasks. And that was the last touch I wanted to add, and I believe we are done. We are completely done here and added everything. So of course you can add many more functionalities to this, but this is a full application. You can add posts or anything. I mean, post is just a placeholder for anything you want to add. It could be jobs, it could be, goals, tasks, whatever. So this was our MERN stack part 2 and the last part, in fact. So we are done with MERN stack. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. This was a big project in my opinion, and I'm glad you guys stood by me. And I want to give you all a special thank for subscribing to my channel. The other day I hit 1,000 subscribers and I was so happy. So thank you very much. It's very encouraging to see you guys liking my content, and I'm very thankful to you all. So see you all at the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.